Konnichiwa. I'm recording this podcast for the Passion Institute from Japan today. And I've just had the last few days here, and I wanted to share some of the leadership lessons I believe that we can learn from Japan. So many, particularly around the heart, head, and the habit. Well, Japan's always been a very inspiring place to me. I remember coming across in my first role when we were looking at projects and dealing with the Japanese people, and they were always so respectful. But it's only in the last few years that I've started to travel here. This year, I've already had a couple of trips here, and I just think that the way that they have respect, the way that their systems thinkings work, their discipline work, I just think that there's a lot of leadership lessons that I wanted to be able to share with you as I've reflected from the last few days as well. And I think that leadership here is always grounded in their values and their meaning, and that's the part that's really important. So I want to always lead with the heart in our conversations, whether it's the podcast or any of the work that I do. And one of the beautiful guests that I've had on this podcast is Hector Garcia. He is one of the co-authors of Ikigai, the beautiful book. And so I felt that from a heart perspective to really discuss Ikigai first, because Ikigai is really a reason for being. It's, many Japanese people, even after retirement, for example, they pursue their craft. They want to continue to give into their community. And they do that because it gives them purpose, because it links into their ikigai, their reason for being. I remember watching the 100 Years on Netflix program, which looked at all the different blue zones, the healthy zones where the most amount of people were centurions or got over 100 years of age. And Okinawa was featured in that, where the elders in Okinawa practice their gardening, they continue to mentor other people. And again, it's that pursuit that keeps them engaged. And as a result of that and all the other physical activities they do, it also keeps them healthy. And I noticed, and I wrote a couple of posts about it. I haven't done a podcast on it before, but I wrote a couple of posts about it when I was in Japan earlier this year. And I noticed that when I was in the hotel, not only the hotel staff would bow, but I meant everybody else would bow. And I just thought that that was fascinating for me. So people that I didn't know, people that weren't meant to do it, would show their respect by bowing. And I've noticed that being in several meetings in the last sort of few days, that whether it's hotel staff, whether it's colleagues, whether it's other people, they bow to you. And when I ask them more about why they do that, it's that they want to acknowledge you, but it's also their sign of humility. It's the fact that it's not hierarchical. Everybody does the bowing to everybody else. And so the leaders demonstrate, I guess, the value that that person more than what the role that they do. So all the leaders will also bow to you. And so for me, when I started to think about Ikigai and the heart, one of the things that really resonated with me was the fact that in Japan, it seems that from a leadership perspective, it means that their heart is anchored in the right place. It means that it's anchored for me from that purpose, and they tend to show that respect and that empathy. Let me switch gears and talk a little bit about head. For me, I talk often about clarity and strategy when it comes to leadership and transformation from the head. And so, what does that mean? And what are some of the lessons here in Japan this week? Well, one of them is that there's that long term vision that I felt that people had here. They're talking about things that they're going to be creating as legacy 30, 40, 50, 100 years from now. The hotel I'm staying at was built around a garden that has been here for 400 years. So they wanted to maintain that garden and built that hotel around it when that opportunity came, which was only in the last sort of, 30 to 40 years. And I was thinking about the days that I used to work in manufacturing, and I remember looking and studying at the time, the Kaizen in the Toyota system, where workers on the assembly line were empowered to stop production at any time. We certainly didn't do that in Australia in manufacturing where I worked there. And, when people saw the problem, in fact, we sometimes saw the people in production as the problem if there was a lot of wastage, if there were issues. And when I looked and studying that many, many years ago now, in terms of the Kaizen, and as I said earlier, particularly I studied Toyota and some of the Japanese factories. One of the things they talked about the fact that every single person had a clarity on their role. They understood what they needed to do. They understood their boundaries. They understood what their responsibilities were. They also knew what not to step over. But the importance of boundaries is you work in your delegations of authority, but you also at that point don't step outside of that. And they also had this shared responsibility. And so this focus on continuous improvement, not improvement, continuous, it never stops, it's endless, it's never finished. And I just thought was, really quite incredible. And also the way that they have that shared responsibility is often through consensus and how they do that. And I hope I'm pronouncing this right, but in Japan there is a principle called Nemawashi, and it means that before people make big decisions, the leaders will quietly consult all the stakeholders. They would make sure that everyone's voice is heard to ensure that there is alignment. It is a slower process. It takes longer for people to make decisions. But what it does, that provides clarity. So also by the time that decisions are made, there is some collective ownership about it. Sometimes I've noticed, in the country and the corporations and businesses that I've worked in, is that sometimes leaders will make that decision, but because that consultative process hasn't been there, because the Nemawashi process hasn't been there, then there is sometimes rebellion or people arguing at the decision. So even though the decision is made quickly, sometimes that ownership doesn't exist. Or sometimes then the process afterwards takes longer and can take sometimes longer than that consultative process. And so I love this idea and this word and this process that they have to be able to honor that. So, my big leadership takeaway around the head was that if you want to really create more clarity, you've got to think more longer term. And you've got to engage your people as you shape the strategy, not shape it without it or pretend to engage them, like really engage them and see what it is that they can do, in terms of that. And when it comes to habit, I noticed that, the Japanese are masters at this part. Leading with discipline, leading with ritual is something that they are naturally very, very good at. Their concept really is that strong leaders can create habits and rituals, but also when we do that, it tends to build that resilience and the competency, but it also then builds consistency. So that consistency is such an important word when it comes to habit. And so I noticed that in their school systems, in their workplaces, people gather here as I walk around the different parks, etc., to stretch together before they start the day. And again, please accept my apologies for another pronunciation, but it's the spelling is Rajio, Ragio Taiso, Taiso. And it's a very simple ritual, but it's about getting ready. It's about having that ritual of energizing yourself. It's about that community. The other one that I wanted to share that I've loved is their sado, their tea ceremony that they have. And when I watch the tea masters who can sometimes that tradition is passed from one generation to the next, every movement is precise, every movement is intentional, and every movement is respectful. It's about that mindfulness and that presence. It's not just about tea, it's about being completely present with each step of it. And so I believe that in leadership, we can learn a lot from that. I think we can really learn to slow down. And I think we can really look at focusing more on the process and understanding different aspects of it and mastering different aspects of it. And I've shared in this podcast that I'm a member of the EO or the Entrepreneurs Organization. And one of the mindsets that we speak about often is Shoshin. And in my last book, Getting Your People to Step Up, I love this word so much that I dedicated a whole chapter to this word Shoshin. And Shoshin in Japanese stands for a beginner's mind. I was speaking to one of the leaders here who practices martial arts. Kenji-san. And one of the things he explained to me is that martial art practitioners are taught to keep a learner's mindset. So even though they are the teacher, they are taught to be able to keep that learner's mindset, no matter how advanced they are, from a state of keeping them humble, from always knowing that there is opportunities to learn and grow. And so I think in leadership, even though there is more expected of leaders, in the sense that, well, you're the leader, you should know better, or you've worked in this organization for 15 years and I've only been here 3 years, for example, and you will know more. That if you come in from a leadership perspective, that it's always about learning, always about growing, that you've got to have that beginner's mindset. And so my big takeaway around leadership was that it's actually not about, completely changing what you do. It's about building small rituals into your leadership. It's about that daily reflection and gratitude. It's about those check ins with our team. But how do we become more present? And how do we cultivate more discipline in smaller ways and have that more of that approach in terms of what we do? So, in summary on this particular podcast, if I had to summarize it in a few words, I'd say that the heart's really leading with purpose and respect, and the head is really leading with clarity and that long term thinking, and the habit is leading with discipline and the rituals. And I think that there is a lot of wisdom in the Japanese culture that we can learn from, and I would love your views. And I so appreciate you tuning into this podcast. And I appreciate you. And if you could take a moment to really follow us and subscribe, that makes an enormous difference in some of the work that I get the opportunity to be able to do and bring some amazing guests in. Thank you for tuning in.